The hospital corridor was too quiet for a place meant to save lives. Every step echoed as Maxwell Carter walked forward, his polished shoes reflecting the bright white lights above. This building carried his name, his reputation, his legacy. He had funded it, expanded it, perfected it. Yet in this moment, none of that mattered, because something unseen had already begun to tighten around his chest. He stopped. From behind a half-closed door came a sound that did not belong in balance sheets or success charts. A child's soft, broken crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to slip through the walls and reach him. Maxwell glanced at his assistant, then toward the door. He had passed hundreds of patient rooms before without slowing down. Today his body refused to move past this one. Inside, machines hummed steadily. On the bed lay a small child, pale and still, tubes carefully placed. Beside the bed stood another child, identical in face, height, and wide, frightened eyes. Twins. One lying helplessly under the weight of illness. The other standing there, trying desperately to be strong enough for both of them. The standing twin held the edge of the bed with tiny hands, whispering words meant only for her sister. Promises she was far too young to make. Maxwell felt something crack open inside him. He didn't understand why his vision blurred, or why his breath felt uneven. He had faced hostile takeovers without flinching. He had survived betrayals, losses, and public failures. But this broke through every wall he had ever built. The standing twin turned suddenly and looked at him. Their eyes met. In that instant, time slowed. Her gaze carried fear, hope, and a silent question no adult should ever have to answer. As Maxwell stared back, a strange recognition washed over him, as if fate had reached out and taken hold of his collar. Without realizing it, the most powerful man in the building felt tears slip down his face. And that was the moment his life stopped being about wealth, and started becoming about responsibility. Maxwell stepped back into the hallway, but the image of the twins followed him like a shadow. The standing child's eyes, so familiar, so unsettling, refused to leave his thoughts. He pressed his palm against the cool wall, steadying himself, questioning why this room, this moment, had shaken him more than anything in his carefully controlled life. A nurse approached quietly, her voice low and tired. "Sir, the child in the bed is stable for now. Her sister hasn't left her side all morning." Maxwell nodded, unable to speak. "Where are their parents?" he finally asked. The nurse hesitated. "Their mother is in another ward. Very weak." The girls insisted on seeing each other first. Something tightened again in his chest. Against his better judgment, Maxwell followed the nurse down another corridor, far from the polished executive offices. The air felt heavier here, slower. When he reached the room, he stopped at the doorway. The woman on the bed looked fragile, as if strength itself had abandoned her. Yet when her eyes opened and found him, recognition flickered, followed by surprise. "Maxwell," she whispered. The sound of his name from her lips erased years in an instant. Memories surged forward. Laughter over late dinners, quiet conversations, promises never spoken aloud. He hadn't seen her since she disappeared without explanation. Now she lay before him, worn but unmistakable. "You came," she said softly, a faint smile forming. Before he could respond, the twins entered the room together. One climbed carefully onto the bed, the other standing guard beside their mother. The resemblance was undeniable. Same eyes. Same expressions. Same pull on his heart. "They're strong," the woman said, watching them. "Stronger than they should have to be." Maxwell's voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell me?" She met his gaze, eyes filled with both regret and resolve. "Because you were building an empire. And I didn't want to be the reason it cracked." The truth settled over him like a storm. These children weren't strangers. They were a reflection of a past he had unknowingly left behind. As one twin reached out and touched his sleeve, whispering, "Mommy says you're important," Maxwell realized this visit was no accident. It was a turning point. The room felt smaller as the weight of understanding settled in. Maxwell lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, no longer the owner of the hospital, no longer the man everyone obeyed, just someone trying to hold himself together. The steady rhythm of the machines filled the silence, counting moments he wished he could slow. The woman's breathing was shallow, but her eyes remained clear. "I never planned for this to happen the way it did," she said quietly. "I thought I had more time." Maxwell swallowed hard. "Time for what?" "For you to know," she answered. "For them to grow without fear. For me to explain everything." Her gaze shifted to the twins, who now sat close together, fingers intertwined as if anchoring one another. "They ask about you every night. Not by name, but in their prayers. The words hit him harder than any accusation could have. He had spent years believing success was measured in growth and control. Yet here he was, confronted with a truth he had never prepared for. 2 lives shaped in his absence. 2 hearts that had learned resilience without his protection. "I didn't disappear because I stopped caring," she continued. "I left because I was afraid. Afraid your world had no space for us." A faint tear traced the side of her face. "I was wrong to decide that alone." Maxwell reached for her hand, feeling how fragile it was. "You should have trusted me," he said, his voice breaking. "I would have changed everything." She smiled sadly. "You're changing now. That matters." One of the twins looked up, studying his face with quiet seriousness. "Are you staying?" she asked. The simplicity of the question shattered him. "No contracts. No conditions. Just hope." He nodded slowly. "I'm not going anywhere." The other twin leaned against him, her small shoulder warm through his suit jacket. The contact startled him, then softened something deep inside. For the first time in decades, Maxwell felt needed not for what he had built, but for who he could become. In that moment he understood that wealth could create buildings, but only presence could create belonging. The hours that followed passed in fragments. Soft voices, careful footsteps, the steady rise and fall of fragile breaths. Maxwell remained in the room long after visiting time should have ended, as if leaving might somehow undo the promise he had just made. When the nurse finally signaled that the children needed rest, he walked them to a nearby waiting area, watching how instinctively they stayed close, as though the world might pull them apart if they let go. Later that night he sat alone with their mother. The city lights outside the window flickered like distant stars, indifferent to the quiet turning point happening inside that room. She spoke slowly now, choosing each word with care, telling him about bedtime stories whispered during power outages, about scraped knees and shared secrets, about how the twins learned early to look out for each other. "I tried to be enough for them," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Some days I was. Some days I wasn't." "You were everything," Maxwell replied without hesitation. "And he meant it." She asked him to lean closer, and when he did, she pressed a small key into his hand. "There's a box," she whispered. "Everything they are, everything they'll need to understand one day. Promise me you won't hide the truth from them." Maxwell closed his fingers around the key. "I promise." When the moment came, it arrived quietly. No dramatic announcement, no warning, just a gentle stillness that settled over the room. Maxwell stood frozen, the reality of loss washing over him in waves he could not outrun. He didn't cry then. He simply stood there, understanding for the first time that some endings cannot be negotiated. The twins were brought back in. They climbed onto the bed, one on each side, holding their mother's hands as if warmth alone could keep her close. Maxwell knelt beside them, powerless, present, and utterly changed. As they leaned into him, he felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders, not as a burden but as a calling. The empire he had built suddenly felt small compared to the task ahead. That night, a man known for control learned the meaning of commitment. Morning arrived without asking permission. Sunlight slipped through tall hospital windows, touching a man who no longer felt like the same person who had walked in the day before. Maxwell sat in a quiet office, papers spread across the desk, yet his attention stayed fixed on the crayon marks decorating the corner of a page beside him. One of the twins had drawn it while waiting, 2 small figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. Across from him, a calm voice explained procedures and next steps, but Maxwell heard only fragments. What mattered was not documents or timelines, but the 2 children now sitting in the playroom down the hall, trying to understand a world that had changed overnight. When he finally went to them, he didn't announce himself. He simply sat on the floor. One twin was carefully stacking blocks, lining them up with precision. The other was drawing again, pressing the colors hard as if afraid they might disappear. They glanced up together. "Are we leaving?" one asked. "Yes," Maxwell replied gently. "But not today. And not alone." They exchanged a look only they seemed to understand. "Where will we go?" the other asked. "To a place with space," he said. "But more importantly, a place where you'll be safe." Silence followed. Then the quieter twin stepped forward and placed a small object in his hand, a smooth stone with a heart scratched into it. "Mommy said to give this to someone we trust," she whispered. Maxwell closed his fingers around it, emotion rising fast and unexpected. Trust was something he had demanded in business, but never been given so freely. He nodded. "I won't let you down." That afternoon he made calls that stunned his team. Meetings canceled. Trips postponed. A calendar once ruled by ambition suddenly opened with possibility. For the first time he chose presence over progress. As he watched the twins walk beside him down the hallway, their steps uncertain but brave, Maxwell understood something profound. Success had never been about what he could build alone. It was about who he could stand beside when everything else fell away. The house felt different the moment the twins stepped inside. It wasn't the size or the quiet that changed, it was the air. 4 years, the rooms had echoed with nothing but Maxwell's footsteps and ambition. Now, small voices and careful movements began rewriting the meaning of home. He watched as they explored slowly, one counting steps between rooms, the other tracing pictures on the walls with curious fingers. That first night, neither of them wanted to sleep alone. Maxwell sat between their beds, reading a story he barely remembered how to pronounce. When their breathing finally evened out, he remained there, realizing no achievement had ever required this much courage from him. Days turned into weeks. There were difficult mornings and silent tears. There were questions he answered honestly and others he promised to answer when they were ready. He learned that strength sometimes meant sitting quietly, letting grief speak without trying to fix it. He learned that leadership could look like holding a small hand during a storm. Slowly, laughter returned. One twin began filling the fridge with drawings. The other started planning everything: meals, schedules, tiny adventures in the backyard. They taught him patience. He taught them safety. Together they built something far more valuable than any empire: trust. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the twins sat beside him and leaned against his shoulders. "Mommy would like this," one said softly. Maxwell felt the familiar sting behind his eyes, but this time it came with peace. "I think she already knows," he replied. Years later, when people asked what changed him, they expected a story about loss or regret. Instead, Maxwell spoke about a hospital hallway, a quiet cry, and 2 small hands that pulled him back to what truly mattered. Because sometimes, the greatest success begins the moment a heart finally learns to listen.